Thank you for being here today. As Shay mentioned, I've been in the education space and research space for a while. I've also been involved in science advocacy and activism, and through all those experiences, it's really brought to my attention how we really need to challenge the ways we both teach and do science. Some of these laws that have been coming out, and there will probably be more in the future, that are targeting DEI efforts or diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in higher education will harm education across the board, but I think it's important to point out how they'll harm the science classroom and scientific research, and how those are, in my mind, are very interconnected and you can't really separate them. So that is what I'm going to be speaking on today. Okay, so a lot of these efforts are happening not just at the higher education level, but also in grade school level. So this is what this data is from Penn America. And I'm showing this just to show kind of what has been happening over time and that it's widespread. So as you can see in the first bar chart, these bills targeting what's done in the grade school classroom or banning books or what have you have really been increasing in the past 3 years. And also this is happening all over the country, not only in red or blue states or any geographical region, but really everywhere. There are attempts at doing this. And I think this is part of the political climate that we're in. And even though this is showing grade school data, it's also making its way into higher education now. So this is data from the Chronicle of Higher Education. They have this great DEI tracker tool that is showing where these laws are being proposed and implemented and passed throughout the United States. And we can see that many have been introduced. Not all have come into fruition and into law, but I'm sure people will continue to try to bring these laws to light. And so you can see, again, it's not quite as widespread as the grade school tactics, but it is happening all over the country. And the possible mandates that are proposed in these bills, each bill is a little bit different, but in general, they're trying to limit state funding for diversity, equity, inclusion programs, or completely removing the offices from these university campuses. They're limiting or eliminating mandatory training for faculty or for students, so that nobody coming into the door of that campus is really getting a background on why DEI might be important. They're eliminating diversity statements from hiring practices, and also often not allowing the colleges to ask students to think about that as part of their application process. And then they're also limiting the hiring or accepting of students based on identity-based preferences as well. What some of these do, not all of them, but some also have a component where they want to review tenure. They also, like at the state level, they also want to have the course materials made public. And they also want these course materials to be reviewed or approved by a state-appointed board in limited cases, but that has been proposed. So obviously, this is not just reducing efforts towards DEI on college campuses, but it's really an academic freedom problem that is going to influence all areas of education, but also the sciences. And this is just a little bit more of an overview of where some of these particular tactics are happening. So you can see mandatory DEI training is very common, and eliminating diversity statements is really common. And I'm just pointing this out because most of these, some are happening in some states, some are not in others, but where a lot of overlap is in Florida and Texas. And so those are two of the bills that I'll focus on next. So Florida has this Senate Bill 266, which was passed recently, that I'll go through a little bit of what is included in it. And I just wanted to point out this would be problematic in any state, but it's really problematic because Florida actually does have a pretty good education system. Their higher education system is ranked #1 in the country, and that is for a lot of reasons because of how many students they have and how much funding through scholarship there is for those students, and just how accessible the education is to people in their state. It's really amazing what they're doing. But now there are some other issues to consider in what is going on those campuses because of this bill. So some of those are that they are also prohibiting the state funding for DEI efforts. They're banning diversity statements. They're going really far with this one. This is, I think, the bill that goes the farthest in limiting what's said in the classroom. So they're not allowing lessons and discussions that include any topics on systemic oppression, whether that be racism or sexism or whatever it is. They're not allowing it in general education courses, which includes, like general biology or general chemistry. It includes the sciences as well. A fun line in it is that it stipulates that speculative ideas should be left to elective coursework, which I think they intended that to be for some, theories you might find in history or the humanities that they didn't agree with. But to me, that's really problematic for what might be considered speculative in the science classroom. When you consider, where people stand on issues like climate change and things like this, we really need to be able to talk about speculative things in the science classroom, and this seems to be disallowing that. And then the other one that's really problematic is, even though what they're trying to say is that this only applies to general education coursework, and other, there'd be more freedom in elective coursework, they're still mandating this 5-year review of faculty that have tenure. And to me, that means they would be reviewing what they're teaching in a course, whether it's general or elective, and also what they're doing in their laboratories or research spaces. So this is obviously very chilling in the academic space, and is not great. The other bills in Texas are this House Bill 5127, and also there's a budget bill, HB1. Both are prohibiting colleges from hiring DEI employees and having statements. They're limiting what's being discussed in college applications, limiting the training of employees and students, and also banning state funding from being spent on DEI efforts. One interesting tidbit about what was going on in Texas is they actually did have a public hearing to discuss if there would be exceptions for DEI efforts that are needed for federal grants or accreditation, but ultimately that idea was rejected and not included in this, and this was also signed very recently this year. This is just a little excerpt from the bill where they try to say that this exclusion on DEI should not be construed to apply to coursework or to research or to data collection, which to me is just kind of impossible. So that's something we'll talk about today, where, I guess it's nice that they wanted it to be, more separate, but I don't think you can really compartmentalize these things. They kind of all flow together. So why do we care, or why do I care? Why do maybe you care about, why DEI matters to science? And I would say it matters because we have a major diversity problem and inclusion problems in science. And so I'm going to show a little bit of data to just show where we are at today with that. So this is data from the Census Bureau, just showing the total population compared to the STEM workforce on multiple levels. We can see here in the first part that, we have still a lack of women in the sciences compared to men. It's not on par with the total population. This is also true when we look by race and ethnicity, that we still have a majority of people working in STEM are white, and other races and ethnicities are lower in the STEM workforce than in the general population. And then also when we look at levels of people who have a disability status, those are also much lower in the STEM workforce compared to the total population. And then when we look at the numbers for education, we also see a similar trend really when we're looking at bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, that when we look by race and ethnicity, these numbers are lower if you're Black or Hispanic or American Indian. Those numbers are going to be much lower, especially in the doctoral range, which to me indicates that, we have a diversity problem and we need to be thinking about why is that, what are we doing in our classrooms and labs that is leading to this problem. And then also, I just wanted to point out this can be different based on the area of science that you're in. And this is really just to say that there's not really going to be any one size fits all solution, and you might need to think about things differently depending on the topic of science that you're trying to broaden, the diversity of the students in the workforce. But certainly if you don't have these DEI support systems on campus, you're not really even going to be able to entertain what those ideas would be. And then also if we look over time, these numbers have not changed a lot. So in the past decade, from 2001 to 2021, you can really see whether we're looking at the STEM workforce and we're looking at sex or race or ethnicity or disability, the numbers are pretty much the same. And then also if we look at the percentages of different race and ethnicity groups receiving degrees by different levels, those numbers have not budged a lot either. So even though DEI has become something that we talk about more in education spaces over time, there's still a lot of work to be done, and we definitely don't need to be eradicating these initiatives from universities. We need to be actually doing more of that work going forward to fix these diversity issues. Okay, so why do we want there to be a more diverse STEM workforce or STEM education system? There's a lot of reasons people commonly highlight, so that's what I have here. I think there's reasons beyond this as well, which I will discuss, but these are some pretty nice concrete ones. One is that more diverse groups outperform less diverse groups in a lot of different ways. And this one study from the Boston Consulting Group found that there was more revenue from innovation in more diverse groups, which it can be a way to measure that innovation actually was of high quality because it produced higher revenue. Also, multicultural learning experiences have been found to improve creativity in multiple ways, which obviously would be beneficial to research. You need to be creative to push the boundaries of what we know. So having a more diverse working group who learns from each other's cultures could help in that process. Also, publication rates have been linked to if somebody feels accepted and prepared. So there's this study that looked at women and minority students who felt more accepted at their institutions and better prepared by, kind of the culture that the institution provided, that they published at the same rate as white male peers. But if they felt more distressed because they didn't have support systems, then those numbers changed. So that goes to say we need to be making sure our research environments are inclusive to help everybody succeed. And then also scientific papers from more diverse groups do tend to have higher impact and more citations. There's a lot of reasons for that, why that might be, but it is another indication that more diverse groups lead to better quality research. But beyond these reasons, I think, increasing diversity and inclusion and equity in science and in research is just really the right thing to do. If we want science to be used, for the common good and to benefit society, then everybody should be included in that process. If you don't have everybody included, then you don't even know what questions other groups might have that need to be addressed. And you also should consider, that I think science can really enhance our democracy as well. Our democracy obviously should be a collective effort where everybody is included. So if we want that intersection to be strengthened between science and democracy, then it needs to be a space where everybody feels included and like they can actually participate and, receive the knowledge from science as well. So we can improve DEI and STEM by multiple ways. And one is by identifying the issues that exist and actually discussing them in the classroom. Because if you don't address the fact that there is a problem, a systemic issue, then you can actually, never get to a place where you can fix it. So there's lots of studies that could be shown about this. I'm just going to give a few examples and brief overviews, but studies have definitely shown that classroom discussions on science and society can really build a better awareness in the students and actually give them more social agency and a willingness to drive change with the science that they're doing. So I think that's really important. Also, having lessons that are specifically anti-racist in the classroom is really beneficial so that students can navigate a lot of pseudoscience that exists out there. If they're just given the science and not the proper context to understand it, they can be persuaded into believing certain things that we know are not true. Part of this issue can come from education itself. There's been surveys of science textbooks that will present things like ideas and genetics in a very racialized way. And so that's something we need to continue to be aware of and to eradicate, because if that's how the students learn about, just a topic in genetics, then it kind of predisposes them to believe other things that are not true. And so it's something to be mindful of in the classroom. There's this study I'm going to show some data from that to combat this issue, when they teach genetic literacy, they don't just teach, what is Mendelian genetics and how is a gene expressed and all these different things, but they actually teach it in this human way where, there's a societal lens to help them to understand how genetic knowledge can be used against racist ideas. And so this data is showing in the red, when they teach in that way versus the more typical way of teaching genetics, there's a significant decrease in both the perceptions of human genetic variation. So that means that it comes more across that we're all more similar than different. And also that genetic essentialism, which is a term that means that we basically infer a person's characteristics based on their perceived genetic makeup, and was something used quite a lot when people were supporting eugenics. Those tendencies to think in that way drop off as well when you teach not just genetic literacy, but in a certain anti-racist context. And another thing that we need to do is to foster more scientific identity amongst diverse students so they can actually see themselves being in this STEM workforce and laboratories and conducting real science. If you can't talk about DEI in the classroom, I don't know how you can really, bring up issues of diversity in the classroom and help students to see role models that they might not normally see in a typical science classroom. So that is another thing to consider as well. So also to get to a point where we do any of that, we need to train faculty in how to actually have inclusive pedagogy so that we can improve their awareness and willingness to change their teaching methods. These laws are eliminating this type of training, at least the mandatory form of it. And so that is obviously going to have issues, because if faculty don't have awareness of how to be inclusive, then they might not even know that they're teaching strategies aren't beneficial to all students in the same way. So this study was one that I just wanted to bring up that showed with these participants in over 3 years doing pre and post surveys after a voluntary like workshop series that helped them to understand how to have better inclusive practices in the classroom, that there were significant improvements in their awareness of social identities of their students and barriers to student success. And also inspired many faculty to actually take action and modify their teaching practices. So this is just to say that, we don't encourage these workshops and these initiatives just because it sounds good, but it does actually have significant impact on faculty and can really encourage them to make changes in the classroom, which then go on to benefit the students in many different ways. Another used inclusive pedagogy to help the retention rate and success of students in STEM. This study, I think, it's small and it was a pilot study, but it was really beautiful what they did. So it was a 3-year pilot study where they had a mixed group of some Indigenous students, some non-Indigenous students, and they restructured many courses to bring in traditional knowledge from Indigenous groups and to make them more inclusive and to really just make it a place that was more accepting of students of diverse backgrounds. They also had a mentorship component where they had graduate students who mentored undergrads. They had undergrads who mentored high school students. So there was this intergenerational fellowship taking place where they were helping each other see themselves in the next step. And they also had research opportunities where they were doing field work that actually went back to benefit the local tribes in that region to have this connection between both the students and the scientists in the classroom and also the community members at large. And so really great things resulted from this. 100% of the students in this program were retained, whereas before it was more around 75%. So you can't really get much better than 100% retention. And then they also had significant improvements in their GPA as well. For many classes, there was a whole grade point that improved. So from like 2.5 to 3.5. So I thought this was a really successful program. And also, if you go and read the paper, there's just really nice testimonials from the students as well about how they could now like see themselves and just see themselves in the sciences. And there was one student saying just like before they thought they had to lose a part of their Indigenous identity to be able to become a scientist. And now they were seeing through this program that no, they could actually be both at the same time, and becoming a scientist could, and being Indigenous actually enhanced their ability to be a scientist. And I just thought it was super beautiful. And this is one example of some data that came out of this. So like I said, many of the students are doing research projects that will go back and benefit their community. And so this is a map that was greatly enhanced with ecological data in the area. And so that is actually now being used by the Indigenous community in that area, this Wakama Nation. And I just, again, I think it's super beautiful that not only does a program like this make students feel more included, but it actually helps them to produce something that benefits communities outside of their school. So, so inclusive curriculum impacts research in design and interpretation as well. So this is now me transitioning a little bit more out of the classroom and how this will impact research. So researchers and scientists must first recognize that there are systemic issues. If you don't recognize those, then you'll never really fix those in how you're thinking about how to do your research and what questions to ask and what data you're including. So I think training in research ethics would be a great place that we could do some reform work in this area. Research ethics is generally required for most programs or most faculty, but what is not generally required are discussions around race, ethnicity, sex, genders, and sexuality. These can be included, but they're not required. What is required is usually things like, plagiarism or reproducibility, falsifying data, which also is, extremely important, but I think we need to think beyond those things as being the only things that are important. So a lot of researchers might not even really ask themselves, like, why are they including race and ethnicity in their study? Does it actually pertain to the biology of what they're studying? Most of the time it wouldn't. And, it's not that race is biological, but it might be that there are other social or economic factors that are coming into the situation, but often that is not really effectively communicated in research. And also we need to think about how these results will be interpreted by others after doing it. So one example I wanted to bring up is that there's this study done by the Broad Institute that actually was very inclusive in what they did in their strategy. So they looked at, they're trying to ask what like genetic characteristics or genetic architecture could be related to same-sex sexual behavior, which, there can be a genetic component to that and an environmental component to that, which is what they end up concluding. And it's not that there's one or two genes that, is going to determine somebody's sexual behavior. Obviously, it would be many things. And that's also what they try to communicate from this finding is that, this is very complicated. There's no way we can simply explain this with genetics, but we are just interested in how that could be part of the picture. But even though they did all the right things, they asked for consent from people who participated. They worked with a group of LGBTQ scientists and others at the Broad Institute to look for how these results could be misinterpreted or things that they might have not thought about to include in the study. They did really all the right things, but still when this study was published, people took it the wrong way, which I think goes back to, the classroom and how we're teaching people to grapple with how science interacts with these things in society. And so one of the things that was unfortunate that came out of this is actually this app was made where people tried to use genetic information to determine how gay are you, which is obviously unethical and not going to be appreciated and is going to be hurtful. So this is just one example to really highlight that we really need to be thinking about how science interacts with these issues and how we can mitigate these kind of misconceptions going forward. So a little bit more on what actually is required from NIH and NSF for research ethics programs. Like I said before, they want you to talk about conflict of interest and peer review and responsible authorship, like things like this, but there's actually no requirement from them that we talk about some of these other, I guess, more social issues that definitely influence STEM and that STEM influences. So this might be something, this is a question I kind of throw out there is like, should that change? Should they be more specific in what they require? And especially in light of this, changes in the political and academic culture that we're seeing, should they be more specific in what they're requiring? And this is just some more language from NSF from their website, basically saying that they plan that programs need to plan to provide appropriate training, but they don't really go much beyond saying what, appropriate training is. So it's really not super specific. And I think that is something that could definitely be improved. Also, things to discuss are how research funding and support opportunities, how they will exist in these states that are eradicating DEI efforts. So that includes, that a lot of these funding institutions require a DEI statement. As we saw before, that's being eliminated. Those statements are very difficult to write and should require a lot of thoughtfulness. And if you don't have a support system like a DEI office or go-to person in your department or campus, I think that's going to be really difficult for people to actually write a constructive statement. I know I've been very thankful for help I've gotten on those in the past, so that is an issue. There's many grants and programs that try to support underrepresented students in the sciences. I don't know, are those going to be allowed to occur on campuses? Can this money be used by a lab that's also receiving state funding? And then a lot of grants want you to do outreach. Are you now going to be limited in what types of outreach you can do, either on your campus or in your community, if it can't, touch upon issues related to DEI? And also program requirements might require students to receive training in that area. And now those schools won't be able to do that. And then also graduate student fellowships and assistantships. Sometimes those students are working either on a DEI project or in an office. And this is a quote from a recent article in Florida, where there is a graduate student who works in a diversity office as part of the way they pay for them to go to school. And so now, will they lose that job? Will they not be able to continue in their graduate work because this is being eradicated from their campus? And this is the last slide I have. Another thing to consider is how, if you're not receiving training and awareness in DEI, could end up limiting the accessibility and impact of your research findings. And that's because these trainings and workshops, and when we think about writing our statements and other things, they help us to understand how we could present our science in a more accessible way. So, there's a lot of things you could consider here, but things like vision or hearing impairment should be considered. If somebody is dyslexic, how are they going to, interact with your work? And also an example I saw recently was maybe we should have more seating at poster sessions for somebody who needs to sit down. Maybe you're pregnant and you're tired and you need to sit down and you can't stand for 2 hours at the poster session. And those are just things that don't always cross our mind. But when you have these awareness trainings, they do more often. And then, are we being thoughtful in the use of metaphors to explain scientific concepts? There's a lot of metaphors out there that are problematic. And one example I wanted to bring up is actually something I encountered when I was in grad school. We had an invited speaker who was a good scientist, had great stuff to show, very interesting talk. But at the end, they decided to talk about this conflict in metabolic states within a cell by showing an image of the Civil War with a very prominent Confederate flag in the image. And to me, that was really not the best metaphor to be using. I grew up in the South, so I know very well that people can react very differently to an image like that and to seeing the Confederate flag, and it might be upsetting to somebody in the audience. And I think I would have always have known that and felt like upset by it, but I don't know if I would have always had like the courage to say something to them to consider changing that in the future, except that I had been to many, workshops or many conferences that had talked about, these kinds of issues and how they impact people and how it impacts, STEM as a whole. And so I did end up sending an email to them later where I just politely pointed out that I didn't think that was the best metaphor to be using, and they could have used something else. And I was kind of nervous about that, but they ended up being really appreciative that I said something, and they said that they would change it going forward. And I think that's just like a nice positive story, I guess, to end on, that being aware of these issues does matter, and you can discuss them with people and they might not be aware, but the more we interact with these types of trainings or these ideas, I think it really helps to slowly but surely change the culture of inclusion in the sciences, and can bring a lot of positive benefits going forward.